Narrator. They say every love story starts with a moment. Mine started with a dead battery and a marriage that had been dying for years. Picture this, me, 38 years old, standing in my perfectly manicured driveway, staring at a car that refused to start, just like my life refused to move forward. Sound of keys jingling, frustrated sigh. Narrator, bitter laugh. My husband, Mark, was shocker nowhere to be found. Again, he'd been emotionally absent for so long. I'd started to wonder if he was just a ghost I'd imagined, someone I'd conjured up to fill the silence in our too big house. 20 years of marriage, and I felt more alone than I had as a single woman in my 20s. Sound of a phone, dialing, ringing. Narrator. So when my car wouldn't start, I called the only person who'd ever actually shown up for me, my stepson, Kyle. Sweet boy, 23, the only good thing that came out of my marriage to his father. But it wasn't Kyle's familiar Honda that pulled into my driveway 20 minutes later. Sound of a truck pulling up, door slamming. Narrator, slow. Intrigued, it was Jace, Kyle's best friend since high school, all 6'2" of him unfolding from a beat-up Ford pickup. 24 years old, sun-kissed skin from working construction, rough hands that looked like they knew their way around fixing things. He had the smirk god, that smirk that made my stomach flip in ways I hadn't felt in years. Footsteps on gravel. Narrator, voice softening. Kyle's stuck at work. He said, popping the hood with practiced ease. But don't worry, Mrs. Carter, I'll take care of you. Music swells low, teasing. Narrator, soft laugh. The way he said it, like a promise wrapped in velvet. Like a challenge I didn't know I wanted to accept. And when he leaned over the engine, muscles flexing under his thin white tee, sweat beading on his forehead from the summer heat, I caught myself staring. Hard. Pause. A shaky breath. Narrator. Guilty, but intrigued. I should have gone inside. Should have made lemonade. Or found busy work in the garden. Instead, I stood there, watching him work, noticing the way his jeans hugged his thighs, the way his biceps strained against his sleeves. When he looked up and caught me staring, heat flooded my cheeks. Sound of car starting, engine purring. Narrator. He fixed the car in 10 minutes. Then he wiped his hands on a rag, looked me dead in the eye with those storm-gray eyes of his, and said, "You should let me take you for a drink sometime. You look like you need one." Pause, heart beating. Narrator whispered, I should have said no immediately. Should have reminded him I was married, but I was his best friend's stepmother. Instead, I stood there, drowning in those eyes, feeling more alive than I had in years. Narrator. I said no. Of course, eventually, after standing there for what felt like hours, memorizing the way his lips curved when he smiled. I was married. He was my stepson's friend. It was impossible, inappropriate, insane. Sound of a door closing, footsteps on hardwood. Narrator, bitter. But then Mark forgot. Our anniversary. Again. 20 years together. And he couldn't even remember the day we'd promised to love each other forever. He was in Chicago on business, probably with his secretary, the one with the tight skirts and the way of laughing at all his jokes. Sound of rain against windows. Narrator. That night, I found myself at the Rusty Nail, alone, nursing a whiskey. sour and wondering when I'd become invisible in my own life. The bar was dimly lit, filled with smoke and the kind of country music that made you want to cry into your drink. Sound of a stool scraping, ice clinking, narrator smirking, until this. Seat taken? Pause. Narrator. Jace. Of course it was Jace. He didn't ask why I was there, didn't pretend this was coincidence. He just sat down, ordered me another drink, and said, "Tell me what's hurting you." Music swells emotional, raw. Narrator. Soft, vulnerable, and God help me. I did. The alcohol loosened my tongue, and suddenly I was telling him everything. About Mark's indifference, how he looked through me like I was furniture. About the loneliness that ate at me from the inside out. How I felt invisible in my own life, like I was just going through the motions of being alive. Sound of glasses. Clinking low murmur of conversation. Narrator. Jace listened, really listened, in a way Mark hadn't in years. His eyes never left my face, and when I got emotional, his thumb brushed my wrist as he took my empty glass. "You're the most beautiful woman in this room," he murmured, his voice rough with something I couldn't name. "And you don't even know it." Music shifts, slow burn, sensual. Narrator, breathless. The next thing I knew, we were in his truck. No words, just heat and want and 20 years of frustration boiling over. His hands tangled in my hair, his mouth claiming mine like he'd been waiting years to do it. And when he growled against my lips, "You deserve to be worshipped," I believed him. Sound of rain on the truck roof, heavy breathing. Narrator whispered, "We didn't go all the way that night. Just kissed until my lips were swollen and my heart was racing, but it was enough to change everything. Enough to make me realize I'd been sleepwalking through my life." Narrator. After that night, I avoided him. The guilt was crushing, sitting on my chest like a stone. I was someone's wife, someone's stepmom. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger, a woman who'd betrayed her vows for a moment of feeling alive. Sound of phone buzzing, ignored. Narrator, tormented. Jace texted me every day. Not pushing, just ... there. A picture of a sunset, a song that reminded him of me. A simple thinking of you that made my heart race and my conscience scream. Sound of door slamming, footsteps. Narrator. But Jace didn't care about my guilt. He showed up at my door a week later, his jaw set, his eyes fierce. "I'm not sorry," he said before I could speak, "and you shouldn't be either." Sound of rain. Against windows. Narrator trembling. Mark was away on another business trip, the third one that month. The house was silent except for the rain and the sound of my heart pounding. And Jace kissed me like a man starved, backing me against the wall, his hands mapping my body like he wanted to memorize it. Music swells, urgent, passionate. Narrator whispering, "You're not leaving him for me." He breathed between kisses, his forehead pressed against mine. "You're leaving him for you, because you deserve to be happy. You deserve to be loved." Pause. A tearful breath. Narrator, broken but resolute. And that's when I knew. That's when the last wall crumbled. We made love that night, not the perfunctory, dutiful sex I'd had with Mark, but something raw and desperate and beautiful. Jace worshipped my body like it was sacred, like I was precious, and for the first time in years, I felt beautiful. Sound of clothes rustling, soft gasps. Narrator. Afterward, we lay tangled in my marriage bed, and I knew I couldn't go back, couldn't pretend, couldn't keep dying a little more each day. Sound of a zipper, drawers opening. Narrator. Determined. I packed my bags that night. Narrator. Mark didn't fight the divorce. Maybe he'd been waiting for me to set him free too. Maybe his secretary had been more than just a work relationship. Maybe we'd both been living a lie for so long, we'd forgotten what truth felt like. Sound of papers rustling, a pen clicking. Narrator. Bitter laugh. The town talked, of course. She left her husband for a boy half her age. Cradle robber, midlife crisis. But Jace? He just held my hand tighter when we walked down Main Street, his chin up, daring anyone to say something to his face. Sound of car doors, engine starting. Narrator. We moved to the city, Portland, where nobody knew us, where we could start fresh. I rented a little apartment above a coffee shop, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Sound of laughter, a coffee shop ambience. Narrator. Smiling. I started painting again. Watercolors, mostly landscapes that burst with color and life. Jace would come home from his construction job, paint still under my fingernails, and he'd look at my work like I'd created something magical. Sound of footsteps on stairs, a door opening. Narrator. You're glowing, he'd say, kissing my forehead. This is who you were meant to be. Music builds warm, loving. Narrator. The age difference mattered less than I'd thought it would. Yes, we were in different stages of life, but we wanted the same things: honesty, passion, a partner who saw us for who we really were. Jace was old for his age, mature in ways Mark never had been. And I was young for mine, finally free to be the woman I'd buried under years of trying to be the perfect wife. Sound of ocean waves, seagulls. Narrator. Soft content. Last month, he brought me to the beach at sunset. The Oregon coast, wild and beautiful and free. He'd been quiet all day, nervous in a way I'd never seen him. When he got down on one knee, the ring catching the dying light, I understood why. Sound of waves crashing, wind blowing. Narrator. Voice breaking with emotion. I don't care how old I was when we met, he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I just care how old we'll be when we grow old together. Music. Swells triumphant, warm. Narrator. Tearful, happy. I said yes, of course. Through tears and laughter and the kind of joy I'd forgotten existed. We're planning a small ceremony, just us, Kyle, who's surprisingly supportive, and a few close friends. Nothing fancy, just real. Sound of champagne cork popping glasses. clink. Closing parenthesis. Narrator. People still talk, of course. They always will. But I've learned something in these past 2 years. Other people's opinions can't warm your bed at night. They can't hold you when you cry or celebrate your victories or see. You really see you for who you are. Music fades to a gentle close. Narrator. Quiet, resolved. So yeah, my stepson's friend fixed my car that day. But more than that, he fixed my life. He showed me that it's never too late to choose happiness, to choose love, to choose yourself. Pause. Narrator. Final, confident. And if that makes me a scandal, well, I'll wear that title with pride.